Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore with me, Ramjee Chandran, and we are in Season 1, Episode 30, and this is Part 8 of my series on the Ganga Dynasty. The last decades of the 9th century, between 880 and 900 AD, were the years of transition from Rachamalla to his nephew Nitimarga, or Ereya. Across the Deccan, the Pallavas had almost disappeared, and closer home, the Rashtrakutas were on their final downslide. The ruling Rashtrakuta Amogavarsha, like all his predecessors, had found the Gangas hard to control, impossible to defeat. But years later, after a battle, he decided to make the peace with Nitimarga. Now, as Nitimarga took over the administration of the Gangavadi, he found that he needed to start paying more attention to one of his local chieftains, Nagattara, who was the Palegar of a small but rapidly growing province called Begur. Strategically located in the hub of trade routes, Begur started swimming into focus. It became so important that Nitimarga agreed to let Nagattara commission a major temple called the Nageswara Temple that stands even today. It was a sign of the location's increasing popularity and value. This episode is about the rise of a region that, 1500 years later, has not stopped growing, Bangalore. But first, allow me pause to thank the Prestige Group for their sponsorship. It makes this podcast possible. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Nitimarga was fortunate to have inherited a revived kingdom from his uncle, Rachamalla. There was power, there was wealth. But as history has taught us, power is inversely proportional to peace. When you cannot tell friend from foe, and the timeless question, are in-laws considered friends or foes? And that brings me to the Nolambas, who were ruling the Tumkur area. Now, the Nolamba Pallavas and the Gangas were allies and recently became in-laws. And that happened because Rachamalla had given his daughter Jayabe in marriage to a prince of the Nolambas, Adhiraja. But this only made things worse with an already belligerent Amogavarsha who had been trying to assert his authority everywhere. Disturbed by Rachamalla's astute policy of dynastic marriages, in the words of historian Krishna Rao, Amogavarsha sent his fearsome general Bankesha, the governor of Banavasi, on a campaign into the Mysore Deccan to subdue the Gangas. Bankesha, with his army, marched south from Manyaketa, and he swept through the areas north of the Kaveri. And then, about 500 kilometers straight south of Manyaketa, he overran the strongly fortified town of Kaidala near Gubbi in the Tumukur district. Now, this would have been Nolamba territory, so the army that faced Bankesha would have without doubt included forces from the Ganga army under Rachamalla. In the battle, the Nolambas and the Gangas were routed, and the Gangas beat a retreat. But Bankesha pursued them like prey and pushed them further and further into Ganga territory. He even crossed the Kaveri and rapidly moved dangerously close to the Ganga capital, Talakadu. If he had continued down that road, he would have been able to invade the entire Gangavadi and place it at the feet of Amogavarsha and help his king achieve the lifelong Rashtrakuta dream, invade and occupy Gangavadi. But suddenly, in mid-campaign, he received a summons from Amogavarsha. Bankesha was ordered to cease all hostilities and return at once to Manyaketa. There was another and more pressing matter at hand, and this was an attempted palace coup by dissidents that included Amogavarsha's son. And abruptly, Bankesha stopped his march. He turned round and went home. And things fell suddenly quiet in the Gangavadi. Taking advantage of this major reprieve and with no military threat in sight, Rachamalla, or Rajamalla as he is called sometimes, quickly took back the territories of the Gangavadi that the Rashtrakutas had started to administer, starting from the time when they had imprisoned his father, Shivamara II. And thus Rachamalla consolidated the Gangavadi. In later years, Rachamalla, well before he died, had co-opted his nephew, Ereyappa, as viceroy. And then, having done that, he continued to lead a life of piety and charity and engaged in a number of philanthropic acts, donating to temples and Brahmins and Jaina basadis and the like. And after the turn of the century, say around 907 AD, Rachamalla died. According to an inscription, he died choking on his own phlegm during a fit of hiccups. It is of passing interest to know that Nitimarga was not Rachamalla's son but his nephew. Rachamalla had no heirs, and he had already decided on the succession, moving to his younger brother, Buttuga I, and that would have happened had Buttuga I not been killed in a battle between Srimara Pandya and the Pallava king Nrupatungavarman. Nrupatungavarman was the son of a Rashtrakuta princess and Buttuga's nephew. As you can see, these things are connected in a manner that befits a soap opera. Having already lost the first battle, Nrupatungavarman Pallava and Buttuga challenged Srimara the Pandya once again, and Buttuga I lost his life, leaving Rachamalla with no option but to hand the throne to his nephew and Buttuga's son, Ereyappa. It started first, as I said, with Rachamalla sharing the kingly duties with Ereyappa, whom he appointed as viceroy around 887 AD. Ereyappa ascended the throne in proper when Rachamalla died in 907 AD and took the title Nitimarga. Nitimarga ascended the throne of the Gangas, inheriting a restored kingdom and a restored pride. But he had his own bone to pick. Many years before, following the Second Battle of Vilande, when the Pallavas had lost, they had retaliated. In one of the retaliatory battles, the Pallavas had captured a major chunk of territory from the Gangas and handed it over to the Banas. This territory was located somewhere south of the Bana strongholds, and therefore the Banas would have been less than happy. They would have seen this more of an imposition than a gift. And the reason is because this territory would only have been of strategic use to the Pallavas as a quick staging ground for future battles. It would have been hard for the Banas to administer, much less defend, this territory. Sure enough, Rachamalla quite easily took back the territory and gave it to his new in-laws, the Nolambas. Now, happy or unhappy, a loss is a loss, and the Banas were understandably upset, so they turned to the Pallavas for help. And they also turned to a collateral branch of the Gangas ruled by Nitimarga's cousin, Prithvipati I. I went into this briefly in a previous episode. Do give it a listen. And this is where it all gets messy. Nitimarga, who was the king now, realized that he would be up against a coalition of three: the Banas, the Pallavas, and the collateral branch of the Gangas. He did not fancy his chances with these three, so he decided to make a preemptive strike. He attacked the Banas. The Nolambas, to help him out, sent an army headed by the general Pompallam. The opposing armies faced off in a battle on the fields of Murugapadi, a village which is about 250 kilometers east of Bangalore. The battle ended with the defeat of the Banas, but the Nolamba general Pompallam lost his life fighting and was accorded a hero's farewell. What is puzzling is, for all the talk of a tripartite coalition, neither Prithvipati nor the Pallavas had raised a finger to help the Banas. According to historian Sheikh Ali, this battle had a salutary effect on the Pallavas and the collateral Gangas, meaning that they became a little more circumspect about the Gangas and viewed them with much more respect. This goes towards my earlier observation that the Banas were a football being kicked around by everybody in the Deccan. Everyone seems to have invaded them at some point or the other, but as soldiers of fortune, they were the great survivors of the Deccan. Back to the Gangas. After Nitimarga had his successful run against the Banas, he still had the Rashtrakutas to contend with. Now, in an effort to bring the Gangavadi back to the way it was, he needed to fight more battles to recover more old Ganga territories that had gone to the Rashtrakutas. And some of this action was centered around the area to the east and the north of the Mysore Deccan region, which brought him into direct contact and conflict with the Bengi country, where Amogavarsha was currently fighting on another front against the Bengi Chalukyas. Now, while Amogavarsha did tell Bankesha to abort his campaign and come back home, he had not entirely given up hopes of conquering the Gangavadi. But as we know now, Nitimarga had the opposite idea. He wanted to retrieve territory that he had lost to Amogavarsha. Things like this have only one consequence, and the two sides were again at war. The defining battle was the Battle of Raja Ramudu, and this happened in 868 AD. There is an inscription that describes this battle poetically. From the location where it was found, we can tell that Raja Ramudu would have been in the Kolar district, and the inscription reads, "With showers of arrows from his bows like a deluge of rain, the flashes of his sword like lightning, the infuriated elephants like black rain clouds, the streams of blood like the path of thunderbolts, in a terrible battle resembling the burst of rains, with a great wind of horses, the foremost of kings defeated his powerful enemies." Judging by how the inscription writer was inspired to write such an hyperbolic account, it is safe to say that Amogavarsha had not only lost, he had been routed. Following this battle, Amogavarsha came to the realization that the Gangavadi was not going to be defeated by force. If it hadn't happened for over a century, it wasn't going to happen now. So, like the true pragmatist that he was, he found a way. He gave his daughter Chandraballabe in marriage to Nitimarga's son Butuga. And then, as long as both kingdoms existed, which was not for very long, the Gangas from that day forth were staunch allies of the Rashtrakutas, and peace finally reigned between them. When I come back from the break, a dive into Nitimarga and all that happened in the Bangalore district during his reign, which is also the story of Nagattara. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. RERA approved.
The region we know as Bengaluru was not called the Bengaluru region until a few centuries later. Back then, it was called Bimpur, the old name for Begur. Towards the middle to the end of the 9th century, the place had started to fill up. Merchants and traders arrived in larger and larger numbers into the area, and this led to an opportunity for people to set up businesses and homes to meet the demands arising from all that activity. Soon, Begur became a hopping hub on the junction of southern trade routes. On a present-day map, we see Begur as a little dot in the south of the city, but back then there was no city of Bengaluru, and Bimpur or Begur would have been the largest settlement right at the center of the stage. Its location was strategic. It was a convenient meeting point of the crossroads that went across the south from east to west, but more importantly, even the most cursory look at Google Maps will tell you how it was also an excellent resting area for merchants who needed to move goods from the north of Begur, however far north that was, towards either coast, and back in the other direction. Today, the most visited landmark in Begur is the Nageswara Temple. The temple was built during the reign of Nitimarga, and the person who would have been involved in building this temple would be the chieftain of the Begur area, Nagattara, who was the head of the Nagattara clan. The Nageswara Temple complex is also home to other temples built over a period of time by the Choras and the others. Back in the day, temple complexes were not merely places of worship, they were centers of learning, repositories for administrative records. They were also granaries to store grain for a difficult time. Around the temple, there were multi-purpose halls called chowltries that acted as rest stops for travelers, like an inn. The Nageswara Temple complex was all that. A considerable number of inscription stones discovered around the temple area attest to that. Now, of all of them, there are 3 inscription stones found in Begur that are important to us. One of them is only a public works announcement, but it throws a lot of light on how life was in the 9th century in Begur. Here's the operative part of the inscription. Nagattara the Iruvulliyarodeya fixed sluices to 2 tanks and had an eastern tank built. It's a short inscription, nothing much more than what I'd read out, but it gives us so much depth to what we know of the history of the day. First, water management. Bangalore is not situated anywhere near a body of water that can sustain life. So the residents of Begur, indeed many other areas in the Deccan, needed to harvest rainwater, and this remains a subject of great interest even to this day. Now, sluices are gates to regulate water flow. So when one tank filled up, they would open the gates and release the water so it flowed into another tank via canals that they had built for the purpose, just like dams. And when all of them filled up, say in a time of heavy rains, and when none of them could hold any more water, the overflow would follow its natural path down one of the hundreds of hills in Bangalore's undulating topography. And then some of the water that did not join major rivers would run as streams towards the lowlands east of the city, creating large marshy areas, some of which were turned into paddy fields, such as those in Domlur right up to the Vartur area. And this only goes to show us how advanced water management was in the 9th century. Communities didn't simply build standalone tanks or lakes. They engineered rainwater catchment systems connecting these reservoirs to handle overflows efficiently. And from these reservoirs, they would likely use the water for essential services such as irrigation, cooking, hygiene, basically to sustain life. And the place referred to in the inscription, Iruvulliyar, is today known as Ibuluru, and it has a small tank next to it. This tank is almost connected to a larger body of water slightly north of it, about 500 meters, and that is Belandur Lake. And these 2 tanks are about 6 kilometers as the crow flies from the Nageswara Temple in Begur. Today, the city has been built over without mercy, but a look at the map of the Begur area still reveals a number of blue patches, and each one of them is a man-made tank. So life in the day was supported by harvesting and managing rainwater intelligently. It is fascinating how the history of Bangalore merges with its geography in ways that are relevant to this day. Over 1,000 years after the Nageswara Temple was built, the city has all but forgotten water harvesting as a sustainable source of water. But even the most trivial stabs that the city makes towards it is encouraging, even heartening. The 2 other inscriptions I mentioned yank us back to the politics of the day. One of them is a richly graphic carving of a battle, the so-called Begur inscription that describes the Battle of Tumbepadi. Tumbepadi is today the village of Tumbadi. It's about 100 kilometers due north of Begur in the Tumakuru district. And the main feature of Tumbadi is the Tumbadi Dam, which is connected with a series of tanks. When the Tumbadi Dam and all the connecting tanks in the chain overflow, the Jayamangali River comes to life, and it runs as a tributary into the Uttara Pinakini in Andhra on its way to the Bay of Bengal. It is historically important as this river flows from Tumbadi through Korattagere and Madugiri, these being very important locations in history. It is in Tumbepadi that a terrible battle was fought. It was between the Gangas and the Nolambas, and this is what led to it. For all their friendship, the Nolambas saw themselves as more than subordinates to the Gangas, which had been the prevailing emotion till then. The Nolambas attacked the Banas, like everyone else seems to have done, and then they declared independence. The efforts of Butuga I to rein them in diplomatically hadn't really worked. By the time Ereyappa or Nitimarga came to the throne, his patience was severely tested by the persistent efforts of the Nolamba Veera Mahendra, who, to increase his standing at the expense of the Gangas, often violated accepted norms and treaties. Historian Krishna Rao writes that the Nolamba king Veera Mahendra had a sinister design on dominion, and his policy of territorial aggrandizement was sufficient causa belli for a war against him. Causa belli is Latin for justification for war. Now, whatever the present provocation was, Ereyappa ordered Nagattara to join a battle against Veera Mahendra. Though Nagattara fought valiantly, he was killed, trampled under the feet of an elephant. For a full and gory description of this battle, please listen to my earlier episode titled The Battles for Bangalore. After the battle, Ereyappa honored Nagattara's death by rewarding his son with the chieftainship and a grant of 12 villages around Bangalore called the Bimpur 12. Of these 12 villages, I have been able to identify some. Bimpur is Begur. Igulur still exists by the same name south of Begur. Puvina Pulimangala is probably the modern-day Hulimangala. Tovaguru is known as Togur, and this is where the electronic city is. And Kudal is Kudalu, a few kilometers east of Begur, which Bangaloreans might know by having looked at something called the Kudalu Gate. There's another twist to this: religion, which has been the cause of most wars in history. Many believe that the undercurrent of the Ganga rivalry with the Nolambas was also fueled by a deeper religious divide. The Gangas were secular, but they were great patrons of Jainism. The Nolambas were Shaivites. Now, religion and political power often reinforced each other, so any decline in religious power typically meant a loss of influence and military strength. In a conversation I had with a noted Bangalore historian, Dr. S.K. Aruni, he told me that after Nagattara's death, Shaivism began to gain ground as Jainism waned, with Shaiva temples like Alsur Someshwara Temple soon appearing, especially as the Cholas later overpowered the Gangas. I mentioned another inscription, the third one. This was also found in Begur, sometime in 1915 by the Director of Archaeology, Narsamachar, who chanced upon it. Under his feet, in fact, on the ground of the Nageswara Temple complex in Begur. And on this stone, Narsamachar found the words, Nagattara's son Buttanapatti and his major domo, Peravana died in the battle for Bengaluru. This put an end to fanciful and nonsensical tales of some old lady giving boiled beans to Veerabalala II, who, by the way, happened to rule almost 300 years after Nagattara's son had died in the battle for Bengaluru. I devoted an entire episode for a deep dive into the origins of Bangalore's name. It is one of the introductory episodes called How Bangalore Got Its Name. The theories around this subject are as fascinating as they are absurd. Do give it a listen. These inscriptions were the first record of Bangalore's history and the first signs of its growing importance. As for the question, where was Bangalore in which there was a battle important enough to record for posterity? No one really knows. In the next episode, I move towards the end of the mighty Ganga Dynasty and describe the new players that drove our history. It only gets more and more fascinating. All that is coming up very soon. Thank you for listening. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.